Imagine if every morning when you got up, it just felt like New Year's Day, when it was the first day of the rest of your life, and whether you were going to work or whatever you were doing, it just felt like you were doing what you should be doing. That whatever you had set up for that day was contributing to the furthering of your purpose on earth. Well, that's what it is to have a purpose. And we are absolutely blessed today to have the father of the purpose with us, Zach Mercurio. And Zach is a researcher, and he's widely recognized as one of the top authorities on the subject of purpose. Besides research, Zach is very much a hands-on, practical sort of guy who works with nonprofits, multinationals, and pretty much anybody who wants to get tangible results through harnessing the power of purpose in their organization. So let me bring Zach in and let's introduce him to you. Hey, Zach, so you're very, very welcome. Thanks for joining us here today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I think it's yours is one of those topics that it's just a no-brainer. Everybody wants to know about it. So expect to be well exercised on this session today.
Beautiful.
I think you're going to earn your fee.
Good.
Yeah. I know. Zach is doing this out of the goodness of his heart, so I'm just doing a little bit of wind up there.
Yeah.
So before we get in and we start talking with Zach and talking about the topic, I just want to bring Aoife in. Those of you who are familiar with Aoife will know her from the Mindful Leader program, and Aoife is the one who's going to be doing all of the work in making sure that this workshop works. While myself and Zach are talking away there. So Aoife, can you tell us about the logistics and so on?
Sure. So I know a lot of you joined us for the Mindful Leader program, so the setup is pretty much the same. And while Deiric and Zach are going through the content today, you can type your questions on the right bottom of your screen in the chat box. And once we get through about halfway through the session, I'll be posing those questions to Zach and Deiric. We can dive a little deeper into the content. But as you're thinking of them, feel free to type them in there. You also have your Q&A box down the bottom of your screen, and you can chat your questions in there as well. So very easy to use, and that's all. This system's very, very straightforward. So enjoy, everybody.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Aoife. So as I said, Zach is the author he's very much the man on purpose, and he's the author of The Invisible Leader. So let's bring Zach in, because one of the first things that I'm curious about is why call the book, Zach, The Invisible Leader?
Well, as I was researching the book, I came across many stories of purpose-driven people and organizations. And as I was interviewing them, one of the things that I found that was similar is that they said things like, oh, well, when we had a purpose, the bus drove itself, or I don't really know what happened. All of a sudden, people started taking over and ran with it, those types of phrases. And that collective self-transcendence to a bigger contribution seemed to be motivating these teams. And I started really looking into that. What is that force? What happens when a group of people transcend self to a bigger contribution and all believe in it? And so I found this Mary Parker Follett, who is a management scholar, a social activist here in the States in the late 1920s. And she had this theory of invisible leadership, that she said both leaders and followers are following the invisible leader, the common purpose.
Okay.
And so since there's been a lot of theorizing on this idea of invisible leadership, but really the research now backs up the fact that one of the most compelling motivators of our behaviors, our actions, our attitudes isn't necessarily a person that's driving us or a result that we're driving towards. It's actually the pulling force of a common purpose. So that's why I say, the best leaders scientifically of our lives, our attitudes, our actions aren't people at all, aren't things, aren't money, but it's a common purpose, a belief in a contribution, a transcendence that pulls us. So that's the invisible leader, purpose.
Okay. And you know what I really like it. You just mentioned a word in there that's going to trigger in a positive way a lot of the folks who are on this call who came through our Mindful Leader program and a couple of other sessions. And you said the word science, because there is a huge amount of science behind the effect of purpose in our lives. This is not, again, it's like a lot of the stuff we'd have covered on the Mindful Leader program. We're not asking people to take this on faith or because Zach Mercurio said so. There's a deep neuroscientific basis for the effect of neuroscience, right? It's something you explore in the book.
Yeah, I mean, deep, not only from a scientific perspective, but also sociologically. I mean, purpose is sort of one of the uniting traits of our species. I mean, we are wired to search for why. My toddler reminds me that all the time. Yeah. He just learned language to make sense of the world. What does every toddler across the world ask? One of their first words, why?
Right. Yeah.
We're wired for purpose. But what happens in our brain, and the research is really powerful, is that researchers, especially at UCLA's Semel Center for Neuroscience, has found that we have a part of the brain that's hardwired for contribution, hardwired for altruism. And if you think about it as a species, the only reason why we've survived is because we contribute to one another, and our brain rewards us for that. I mean, numerous studies have found that when we think about our impact on another person, we get a little boost of the happiness trifecta: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. We literally feel better and become better when we transcend ourselves. And I think that's an important component of purpose that's often misunderstood, is that purpose is a reason for being, a reason for existence, but it's only beneficial scientifically right now if that reason for existence is useful to others. It's that usefulness that activates the benefits that we get to help us be better, feel better, and do better. And this is why it's not, when I see all the data on, if you want to be more profitable, lead with purpose, or if you build a better team with purpose. But we got to remember that it's purposeful people that become better, that drive results. You don't just drive a result because of purpose. It's human beings that come alive scientifically when they're contributing. And it's, everything else in nature dies when it no longer serves a purpose. And I think the same is true psychologically, neurologically, with people as human beings at work and in life.
And in some of your talks, I know, and I thought of it just minutes before we came on. I screwed up. I should have asked you to have it queued up. You use a piece of video from the 40s that was a little bit of research video. And maybe you tell folks about it, because this is not, and I don't mean this in any disrespect, what you're saying is not new. It's just what you're saying about how you harness it is new. The science has been there a long time. Can you tell them, folks, just a little bit about that video?
Yeah, one of the things, so I work with a lot of people in business, especially who are skeptics on this idea. They'll say things like, "Oh, this is the fluffy stuff. This is
I don't believe in this."
Yeah, when market conditions are great, I'll focus on this. But really, it's so foundational. One of the studies is it's Hyder and Simmel's 1944 animation. So we'll send this as a follow up. But if you look this up.
Great.
Basically what it is these two psychologists in the 40s had two graduate assistants, and they created an animation with black shapes moving around on a white screen at random. And they showed it to people and asked the simple research question, what happened? And almost everybody in their first sample, except for two participants, found a emotional story to the randomness, the chaos that was happening. These were two-dimensional black shapes, but all of a sudden they were bullies. The brain gave the triangle a gender, like that's a man triangle. They're chasing each other around. And I show this to people, social entrepreneurs, CEOs, students, and everybody starts getting really energized by creating these emotional stories. And it's a classic study that demonstrates that our brains are wired for purpose and meaning. We're wired to create a storyline that pulls together all of sort of the randomness of our lives and work and the stimuli that we're receiving. That's where I think mindfulness fits really well into the practice of purpose, because the ability to stop, recognize the stimuli, and then use purpose as a contextualizer to choose your response is really powerful. So So, and what I say to people is that purpose, when you're able to identify your purpose, your contribution, it serves as the grand storyline of all of the randomness that's happened. So it becomes part of you delivering that contribution, and it serves as an aligner. So Heider and Simmel, 1944 animation. It would have been fun to do that here.
It would have been fun. I dropped the ball, but I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll share that afterwards. You mentioned as you were going by there, and it's a word that I didn't do a word count on the book, but the word meaning appears probably as many times as purpose does throughout your book, and the Heider and Simmel research shows that we're continually searching for meaning, and I guess that sense of what would I call it? That sense of anxiety that we're not in the right life, or we're not in the right place, or we're not doing what we should be doing is that disconnection from the meaning. And as you say, I think a mindfulness can be great for making you a little bit more self-aware as well, so that you know a little bit more about what you should be doing. But you're not the first person who's spoken about finding your purpose, and yet lots of people have gone through a process and they have created a purpose and got to the end and found, hey, it's not doing it for me. And I think that's where you get that thing you talk about as authentic purpose, the difference between purpose and authentic purpose. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think everybody on this call is a seeker. Everybody is looking for that purpose. They wouldn't have come on a mindfulness program. They wouldn't be on this call today unless they had that itch they couldn't scratch. What's authentic purpose? Yeah,
a beautiful question. So there are different types of purpose. And this is, I think, gets lost in some of this purpose work. And psychologists have found there's purposes that are aimless and useless. So it's basically like, I want to eat a lot of French fries. It doesn't have an associated goal. It's not useful to others.
Okay.
There's purposes that are aimful and useless, meaning I want to make a lot of money, this amount of money for me, but it doesn't serve any broader meaning or purpose for other people. So it's aimful and useless. And then there are purposes that are very useful, but they don't have an associated goal. They're aimless and useful. The type of purpose that psychologist Corey Keyes, in his expansive review of what purpose is, finds that is the only one that has scientific benefit, like we've talked about, is one that's aimful and useful, meaning there's an associated goal to it and it's useful to others and society. He actually calls that authentic purpose. Like that's what it's called in the psychological world. So, and a purpose that has an aim and it's useful to others, we benefit from that usefulness. So I think that's an important point right there that informs my own definition. But I also think that we are very susceptible to environment, to socialization, to what I call and other people call default purpose or phony purpose. And that is when, like, for example, I just was working with college students a couple days ago. And if those college students see their purpose as their degree plan or their major or their job, that's really someone else's plan for their lives. I mean, so the default purpose, it's easy to get back into that. Now, when I add authentic in my definition, building on the aimful and useful definition of Corey Keyes, I say authentic is your genuine, unique reason for being. That is useful to others. And so I think that genuineness, that uniqueness is powerful because purpose draws on strengths. It draws on what impact you want to make outward, that usefulness. Anytime you're using your resources to meet a human need, you're living in purpose. And I think that what is important to understand there is that I've done purpose statement workshops with almost 100,000 people, and I've never seen the same statement.
Right.
And that uniqueness of what we notice, how we improve the moment, is so important because you can have a purpose that's not your own. You can also have a purpose that's not beneficial.
Okay. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm just linking back to something you said earlier on. When you said aimful and useful, you mean useful in the broader social sense. It's not just useful to me, it's useful to us as social human beings.
Yeah, beautiful clarification. Yeah, that usefulness is the contribution to others. And and that contribution to others, that element of self-transcendence, is really the key to understanding what I think is the proper definition of purpose that result in the benefits, the health benefits, the work benefits that we experience with purpose.
So give me a sense. Let's say that I managed to get myself to a place where I have created for myself, or uncovered, probably is a better word, an authentic purpose. When I wake up in the morning, how is it different to when I'm working to a default purpose? What's the experience like, if that's a fair question?
Yeah, that is a very fair question. Can I backtrack just a second?
Please do. Please do.
I think that one of the pieces that I've learned, over the course of my career and working with people, is that this idea of finding a purpose can be sort of misleading advice, because it assumes that a purpose is somewhere out there, in a magical field that you can go find.
Sure.
But like you said, that uncovering piece is important, but even more important than finding a purpose, that I sort of advocate for and the research advocates for, is the difference between finding a purpose and being purposeful. So being purposeful when you wake up in the morning is being able to attach what you're about to do with the overall impact that you want to make.
Okay.
Like if you knew that you existed to help end hunger, for example, that purpose, as an example, what you were doing that day, purposeful people, what we find in the research, they are able to ask themselves the questions before each mundane task of their day: how will this help eventually achieve that impact? Here, an example of that is when we were racing to the moon here in the States with NASA. There's a great study on how President Kennedy said, we want to go to the moon to advance science. That was sort of their big purpose. But each team at NASA had a ladder to the moon where they could tie each objective, each task that they were doing, to the achievement of advancing science, very deliberately.
Right.
That's a difference. That's the way purpose works, when it serves as the contextualizer of your life. When you wake up, you're able to think about the things you do very differently, no matter how mundane they are.
Yeah. So there are no boring days, as you say. There are no mundane tasks, because they're all contributed. They all have meaning. Of course, there are boring tasks, but they have meaning. They're bearable, and you can work with them. Now, this is something, and I need to say to folks, we'll tell you how to get a copy of Zach's book, and you really should grab it. Personally, I grabbed it on Kindle. It is a great deal on Kindle. And Zach goes deep into the science and the background and so on, but he also goes into a very practical step-by-step approach, not just for helping oneself uncover a purpose, but helping you, if you're a leader and you're responsible for leading other folks, to help them uncover their purpose and recognize it. But Zach, at the risk of asking you to put a pint in a half pint pot, is it possible in a couple of minutes just to give roughly what is the process for the folks here who are online? What's the general process you go through to try and begin to uncover that authentic purpose? Now, let me ask you a secondary question. And how do you know when you found it?
That's great. Well, I always say, if you think you've arrived, you're probably further than where you started. And I think that it's the active self-reflection on purpose, because it evolves. I think it evolves over time. I talk about that purpose isn't found, it's crafted. It's crafted through trial and error and reflections. Because from a personal perspective, so I'll give a brief overview from a personal perspective, and then I'll spend a minute. I'll try to get a drop in the pint glass for the organizational perspective. But for the personal perspective, purpose really comes out of three major things. It comes out of the things that energize you. So psychological literature on strengths, I mean, you're very well aware of that. Those are your purpose resources. Your skills, the things that you're good at, and then ultimately that impact, the direction of those things. How do those things impact a human being? One thing that you might do that I've seen that works incredibly well is writing and reflecting, which I'm sure you all have covered.
Sure.
That every day you made a list of what you loved doing that day, what you were good at that day, and what you thought could be better about the world that day. At the end of a week, for example, you'd have 21 lists, and you start seeing these themes that come out: impact themes, strengths themes, talent themes, and then crafting that unique contribution at the intersection of those can be powerful. So that self-reflection there from an individual perspective. When we talk about work and the workplace, one of the key points is sort of what I said earlier. Instead of trying to get people to find or rally behind this singular purpose. Focus more on helping people be purposeful. So
Okay.
one of the things is creating a clear line of sight in everybody's job, for example,
Okay.
everybody's tasked to that purpose. For yourself, waking up in the morning and asking yourself, just like you had mentioned as we started, what am I going to do today, and how is what I'm going to do going to impact a human being? I mean, really just taking the space to think about that, or making sure with your people that before you show them what to do or how to do it, you show them why it matters. You know, what is at the end of the chain of what they're about to do, and using the language of purpose repeatedly. You know, there was a question that came up on chat. I know I'm not supposed to look at this, but it said, what's the factor of, you know, environment in that? And I think environment is everything. I mean, because if you bring in someone to your organization, for example, and you get them to believe in this big other-centered purpose, but then the environment, the reward system, the language disconfirms that, it's psychologically devastating.
Sure.
One of the most psychologically devastating things for a human being is when a belief is refuted by the environment. And so using the language, making a clear line of sight to the purpose, and really understanding, helping people understand and believe, and you believing in an authentic sense, what is the human impact of all the little things that you're doing in your day and in your job and in your work.
Right.
Sorry, I know that was a lot into the glass.
No, you did well. I just looked at the clock when you were starting, and that was about 3.5 minutes. This was bloody good.
Wow.
I hope you didn't talk yourself out of any book sales. But no, great job. One of the things you mentioned in there, and it was something that we covered. You're right. We use it as a tool on the Mindful Leader program. Was and we talked about journaling, and that's just that free flow sort of journaling, and we looked in that at identifying one's purpose and who they wanted to be as a leader at the end of the journey. So I think a lot of people fed back to us and said, "Wow, I was introduced to journaling at one stage when I wasn't ready for it, but it really is a great tool for what you're talking about."
It really is. I mean, we have data on almost everything else in the world except ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, so being able to go back and look at that, you know, when you're in transition, especially times of career transition, life transition, and you're able to go back and say, okay, it's not about what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. You know, it's about what my life is going to do for others, and you make decisions accordingly. That's where, again, we activate sort of the benefits of purpose.
And you know what's interesting? I'm sure you're a researcher, and you've done an awful lot deeper research than I have on this area. And it's something that people commented on the program, was that the more you learn and the more you read and the more you read into all of this area, the more you realize everything touches everything. And when you're talking about that purpose, there's echoes there of Csikszentmihalyi on flow. And that whole thing, isn't there? It's all just everything touches everything. So would you say that identifying moments of flow is a good way of figuring when you're kind of on track to a purpose, or is that a bad connection?
That's a great connection. Oftentimes we overlook when we feel great. Yeah. And I often, one of the big questions that I've been asking myself is, what am I doing when I'm doing what I'm doing well? What are the actual things that I'm doing when I'm in flow? That helps identify that those passion areas, those intrinsic energizers. One thing that I think is missing with flow and is the usefulness, the impact.
Yeah.
What is the direction of that flow? Because you know, I look at it, you know, as sort of like a graph. You know, there's different types of happiness in psychology. There's pleasure, rock star status. That's like you're pursuing the result, right?
Yeah.
I often talk to salespeople all the time that say they're incredibly happy and incredibly devastated when they achieve a quarterly goal, because they're happy because they achieved it, but they're devastated because they have to create a new one. You know, the problem with results is the fact that we can achieve them, and so we always want more. That's that pleasure status. Passion is the flow status, where it has a longer time half-life, you know, in our brains. We get a little bit longer happiness because we're in flow, but there's still that then what question and what question that's not asked. And that higher meaning purpose really helps us to experience fulfillment, because the pursuing of that higher purpose really outlasts us, gives a direction for our flow, goes back to the neuroscience. We feel better because of it. So I'm glad you asked that question, and everything does see all that does touch each other really in a really cool way. And so,
and I love, and there you are, you're touching into positive psychology. I've forgotten the man's name now just for a moment, but just how pleasure and so on and so forth, and that sort of shallow happiness habituates, and the more you get of it, the less important it becomes to you. And so that enduring contribution that you make is obviously very important. There's something you say very early in the book, and I'll swap roles into the leadership role in a moment because of the audience. But there's one thing you say, and you just kind of echoed it there. You said that a purpose is not something that you ever arrive at. I'm paraphrasing, but you don't ever reach a point where you've achieved your purpose. Can you just sort of flesh that out a little bit? Because I think you alluded to that a moment ago. Yeah.
And I think that, purpose is a contribution, it's like that reason for being. Yeah. And one of the difficult things is when a purpose becomes finishable. It's not a purpose anymore. It's a goal. I'll give one example from the corporate world. Microsoft's purpose with Bill Gates was to put a computer in every home. Yeah. Now that you know the problem with that, and what happened in the mid-2000s is they achieved it. Yeah. And what happened to their teams is they started chasing after really bad product innovation, really poor research and development dollars. There was fragmentation on the teams. Motivation went down. Because you could achieve it. Their new purpose since Satya Nadella took over is now to help other people achieve more through their technology. It's something that can't be achieved. It's something that you can never help everybody achieve more. Yeah. So it's constantly outside of yourself, and it constantly pulls you forward. Whereas a result just pushes you, something you can achieve, purpose pulls you. So one quality that I think is really important with purpose when you're thinking about it is that it's highly aspirational and it's unfinishable, meaning that it's something that will live on beyond you, which is ultimately what legacy is. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a quality of purpose that research has found. And there's this great study by Andrew Carton, again, on NASA, that finds that the aspirational, unachievable purpose is quite possibly one of the most powerful motivators when it's made real in organizations. And that Microsoft example is a powerful one. Their turnaround since infusing that has been remarkable.
Well, let me be most of the people who'll be on this call are either leaders leading a team, or they're coaches, consultants, trainers working to assist leaders leading teams. So before we swap to the questions, let me just step over onto that other side of things. Sure. And I think one of the holy grails right now, basically because it's starting to look very much like it's not achievable, is employee engagement. And it looks like from folks like Gallup that we just continually plunge lower and lower. No matter what country you go to, employee engagement just seems to be an impossible goal. You've made a very, very strong connection between the leader as the purveyor. Maybe purveyor is the wrong word, but as a purpose instrument, a purveyor of purpose.
Purveyor of purpose.
You can have it. You can have it.
Absolutely.
As a purveyor of purpose. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? So what is the leader's role? Let's say in they obviously have a responsibility to get people engaged. Lots of other things, but one, to get people engaged. So how does that mesh, and where does the line stop? Where does the responsibility begin and end in terms of the purpose for the people? Yeah, there's a great, so first, I think engagement is somewhat misunderstood on a popular scale, because engagement is really, as a psychological construct, is defined as pride and enthusiasm. Okay. So these two, pride and enthusiasm, which are two affective and emotional qualities, right? Mm-hmm. So then we have to ask ourselves the question of, well, what generates emotional attachment and what generates emotional commitment? And then, like you said, all these things touch one another. And then you go down the line and you think about what activates emotion for us. And a lot of times it's qualities like empathy and curiosity, the acts of those things. And that relates back to purpose as a key mechanism for emotional commitment, which is a key foundational part of employee engagement. And I also think that there's a great article in the Academy of Management by Michelson, and he says, what is the motivation for motivation research? And one of the challenges with engagement, or the popularization of engagement, that I've been seeing, is that
people want to engage people so that they'll be more productive for them.
Yeah.
Which is a problem. And in a sense, employees, and there's been many studies which find that employees see through that and see it as a tactic for some self-serving end. It's really not a purpose-driven approach. I think we need to, when we approach engagement as being engaging people for the people as ends in themselves, the result is the results that we get. We start more aligning with purpose. And when you start doing that, you think, how do we satisfy this craving for meaning and purpose that everyone has? And you had asked, so what is the role? You had asked, like, what is my role as a leader? And I think, and I don't know how popular this opinion may be, but when I talk to people, I think that if you're responsible for an environment where people spend 40 to 50% of their waking lives and they're human beings, regardless of if they're there for a paycheck or how they got there, they're there.
Sure.
And so I think that we as leaders have a responsibility to relentlessly pursue an environment that elicits the search and connection of purpose and meaning to the work, regardless of who it is. I often get people who say, oh, Zach, well, this group, the IT group, they'll never get on board with this, or there's this shift that's really difficult. And it's just funny. We don't do that in our personal lives. Like, we don't say, oh gosh, this one of my kids is never gonna learn or never gonna get on board, right? Yeah. So I think we have this sometimes self-fulfilling prophecy that there's bad employees, that there's difficult people. When it's human beings, they're all searching for purpose, and the relentless pursuit of that, I think, is the modern manager's role.
Okay, and folks, let me just tell you that in the book, again, you'd only be about a little bit over a third in, and Zach starts really deep diving into this stuff, and has helped us actually in Genos with the working through the book and in improving our purpose somewhat. I hope I haven't run it past them to get the benediction yet, but so bear in mind that you can really dive an awful lot deeper, and every chapter that he has in the book has purpose tips. So he talks specifically about what do you do now, so at the end of each chapter. So I promised the folks who were coming along, Zach, that it'd be half us talking and half them talking with you. So Aoife, would you like to come back in and light up and just let us know what questions have come, and we give folks a rest from me?
Yeah. So first, I just want to share one or two comments with you guys from the audience. I won't name any names, but one individual shared that for me, when I'm living with purpose, living my purpose, I come alive. When I'm doing what I feel is my purpose, coaching people in finding their purpose or living with purpose-driven life, I'm using all my talents and strengths. I'm convinced that if everyone lived according to their purpose, people and employees would probably thrive in the workplace.
Wow, I think there's a book in that.
Yeah, definitely. And then another comment to share, when one is in flow, I found that my focus is not on me, which is why I'm in flow. And this really connects my purpose being about connection and contribution.
Ooh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful, because I think that that flow is a resultant condition of that transcendence to others. I'll write that down. Thank you.
Definitely. Thanks for sharing, folks. Okay, so yeah, we have plenty of questions. So I wanted to ask, do you believe that we're born with our brains wired for this authentic purpose, or is it something that we learn from our environment? And if born with it, why do you think some people don't exhibit a sense of purpose?
Wow. That is
how long have you got?
Big question. So, I don't have the evidence to conclusively say either way, and I don't think many people do, so I'm not going to pretend to. But I will say, in looking what I've looked at, is that we can say pretty firmly that people are born with seeking systems in their brain, that we're born seeking. I mean, we seek to contextualize our environment. We seek to have a story, have a meaning. Our brains, for some reason, again, we don't know how or why, but they give us rewards when we contribute and transcend ourselves. And sort of these truths over, when you look at the different spiritual traditions, when you look at psychology, when you look at chemistry, biology, seem to suggest that our brains, that we are meaning-seeking a meaning-seeking species, a purpose-seeking species by default. So I would say it seems to suggest that.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the second part of that question?
If we're born with it, why do you think some people don't exhibit a sense of authentic purpose?
And I think it goes back to, it's so beautiful. I think it goes back to the environment and I think that they brought it up in the question, that there has been a depression of our seeking systems as individuals. You know, you see it in our educational tracks, especially here in the US. For example, and a personal anecdote, you know, my kid is 4 years old and he's already had a career STEM day, you know, in daycare. I mean,
Really?
which you could imagine my my reaction. But so we start tracking people, you know, we start defining people by what they do and how they do it. And so people start thinking that their purpose is their default purpose. And slowly that erodes, and you see people sort of trying to see through that and be in flow, which you get phenomena like the midlife crisis and things like that. But I think post-industrial revolution, we've been on this produce, be efficient track where we've measured people by their ability to acquire and achieve things. And so there's been a socialization that we exist to acquire and achieve things, which is very hard to break. And that's why I think some people who aren't in environments that reward anything else but self-serving behaviors, I think what you reward ultimately is what people become. And if they're in environments that just define them by what they do, they can define themselves by what they do. But that it always seeps through. You know, I talk to a lot of people who are in retirement right now, moving into retirement, that say, now what?
Yeah.
And that's the question, the space that purpose fills. It's a beautiful question, and let's all keep thinking about that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Okay, and then we have, as someone who has worked in the HR area in several different environments, under very open and flexible bosses, as well as bosses who were quite the opposite, I'm wondering what would be your advice in trying to balance and introduce things like mindfulness or other newer approaches like this, for that matter, into working environments with more old-fashioned folks?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much my life right now. Is you know, I work. So just to give you a little bit of context, my research is on people in frontline professions, people on lines in factories, and janitors, custodians, mechanics. Those are traditionally environments where people don't think purpose is a value, is a need. I think one way to do it is to be authentic in the approach. Have people authentically start naming these things. You know, for example, when I go in, I really ask people, I ask them questions like, when I'm working with purpose, of when did you feel like your job most mattered to you? You know, if I'm working with a hardened CEO, I'll say, when did your job most matter to you? Even if they tell me, I have never heard, oh, when I increased shareholder value, I really felt alive. Or when I got my direct deposit, oh, geez, I was feeling great. Human beings, humanness will come out of people if you ask the right question. And I think that, like, that question, when have you felt like your job most mattered most? They will say when they're contributing to other people. And then I usually follow that up with saying, why don't we create a system where everybody can feel that, can see that? Wouldn't that be good? Oh, yeah. And then they sort of see how results follow that. And then I also often say, I make sure I say to people, like, I get it. I know that results, you're measured by the amount of value you create. I get that. And that's hard. That must be hard for you, you know, showing that empathy. But I also say that it's all, at the end of the day, it's results because of purpose, because we have a value. And I can only speak from the purpose perspective, but I think going in authentic, really, again, understanding that an environment has been socialized that way. No one's born wanting to create shareholder value. And, you know, for example, we're socialized and rewarded that way. So giving an alternative and having people see what that feels like can be transformative.
Thank you. I really like that line because I'm learning about what it is to become a coach. My background's in marketing, and I love that humanness will come out of people when you ask the right questions. That's really, really great. I like that. Okay, thanks, Zach. Okay, do you agree that authentic purpose is a recognition by someone of being connected to everything and everyone else, and therefore having ultimate significance or meaning?
Oh my gosh. I love these
We've
people.
got a good crowd.
This is
We have a good crowd. Thinkers.
Let's just do an all day session here. Yeah, so I believe one of the first beliefs of purposeful leaders when I'm doing work with them is the belief that you matter right now. So that you can't not matter. I mean, and I just go back to biological systems thinking that every input you put into your day is an input into the whole world. I mean, it's scientifically proven that everything we do matters. And I think you're right. It's the people who have the ability to imagine that impact of even the smallest inputs. I think that's a foundation for purpose, because one of the things I see, especially working with lower income people, or I was just working with college students who they were the first in their family to go to college, is that to say find a purpose, to find a contribution, you're assuming that they already feel like they can contribute. And so I think you have to build the agency that every human being does have something to contribute as a foundation, and that you contribute already. You don't have to have this if-then argument. If I get this job, then I'll be worth something. If I get a degree, then I'll be successful. If people believe that they matter right now, that's the foundation, I think, to starting to live in purpose. So it's more of a comment that your question is spot on, in my opinion.
Perfect. Okay, and then how important do you think that core purpose statement is?
I think it's very important to use the language of purpose and make it a common thing. So I think developing a purpose statement that's other-centered and is active and is contribution-focused is very important as a tool. You know, the research finds we're 40% more likely to achieve a goal when we write it down. I don't know what the research could be around what it is when we write a purpose down and we keep it in front of us, how likely that is to benefit us. But I would hypothesize that it's probably a similar and even amplified effect, knowing the benefits of purpose over goals in general. So I think writing it down can be powerful. I also think rewriting it every year as you contribute in different ways, as you find your place, as you reflect, to do the journaling, I think is really important, not to get too fixated on it. But yes, a purpose statement, I think, is very important to get out there and put out there to contextualize everything that you're doing.
Great. And for those interested in kind of starting on that process now, would your book be a good place for them to go, or how would you recommend someone starts kind of building that core purpose statement for themselves?
You know what? I have a template in my book that has basically the components that make up a psychologically compelling purpose statement. Because you can have a purpose statement that is aimless and useless. Yeah. And you got to be careful with that, because it doesn't really have much benefit for you. You'll just be the rock star, chasing the next goal. Yeah. So the book has it, but also, as I'm thinking, and I know we're live, but I do have a tool called Purpose Match, which is a tool that helps you, takes the research on strengths, your passions, also the research on what are all the possible human needs in the world from this sociologist named Max Neef, and helps you algorithmically develop a purpose statement that has the psychological component. So I will provide that to you all with a code for your listeners to use and take.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, and that will really prime the engines. And I think that the only thing I'll ask in return, and we can talk about this after, is just providing some feedback on the tool. That would be great.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks a million.
Okay. And just something you said there, it put me in mind of a book we sometimes quote on the program by Regina Pally. I think it's Predicting Brain, I think is the name of it. And she essentially says, and this is a non-scientist's vision of it, or expression of it, that the moment you conceive of something, so let's say the moment you conceive of a purpose, your brain starts putting everything together to make that come to pass. And she dives a little bit into the sort of predicting brain. So I think there's probably some research out there that actually does say, you put this together, you establish this, and you immediately start orientating towards it, sort of GPS-like.
Nice, perfect.
Yeah. Yep. And then I think with that, just with the statement thing, I think it's really important, because I've gone into workshops where people said, oh, I did this find your why thing, or start with why thing. And I did a statement and I said, well, what is it? And people was like, oh, I can't remember. Let me get it out. You know, I'm sure you've all done this.
Don't tell me.
Let me get it out. It has to be front and center. So, you know, it has to be used every day for it to have benefit.
You have to believe it. You have to internalize, right?
Yeah, you can know a purpose statement and hate Mondays. It's hard to believe in an other-centered contribution and wish it was Friday.
Yeah. Other questions there, Aoife?
Yeah, plenty. Oh yeah, they're piling in as well. Okay, so Jennifer was just asking, she missed the very start of the session. Who were the 1944 psychologists we referred to?
Yes, it's Heider and Simmel, Heider Simmell, and it's a 1944 study. If she just also Googles attribution study, it's sometimes called that too.
Or you get it in the footnotes of the book, Jennifer.
Okay.
You're good.
Trying to earn my crust, man.
Okay, so then Roman's asking, with many leaders earning 300 times what their employees earn and the constant drive to increase productivity and reduce costs, is it any wonder that employees are disengaged? How do you think, or has capitalism trumped purpose? Wow. Beautiful question.
If you look at, so Ernst & Young's Beacon Institute has a report that's really powerful. I'll send this as a follow-up too. And they talk about what are the societal and economic forces that have necessitated purpose as a core system property as organizations now. And one of those, again, you're like, whoever asked this, like clairvoyant, one of those is social inequality and perceived income inequality that is perpetuated in our current earning structures and disparities amongst corporation, which has resulted in a trust deficit, which has resulted in people yearning for something to believe in, and something that they can trust. And I think that there are elements of capitalism. I'm not going to sit here and say capitalism is bad or good. There are elements of our current state of capitalism that I think have necessitated and brought to the mainstream this yearning for purpose that's always been there. Again, because of what we talked about earlier, like when you just think you're built to acquire and achieve things, there'll always be the then what question. And I think more people, as we've been seeing, have been asking that question. So I think it's amplified the yearning for it. I think there are ways to innovate capitalism to be impact-centered and contribution-centered in terms of how it operates. And I think that's going to be really a task for all of us as thinkers and leaders in this space.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Okay.
I wish I had a more politically adept answer to that, but I don't.
It is pretty good. Pretty good, man.
Yeah. Okay, then can authentic purpose be a negative contribution to society? And to add on to that, and how do values impact authentic purpose? It was purpose. Yeah. Oh, sorry, there's a final one there again as well, and we can take them one by one. Is purpose different than mission?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue, for example, that ISIL or ISIS has an authentic purpose, right? That has a negative society. They believe it's useful to society. And so I think all of the qualifications that I talk about in the book could be applied in a negative sense. Qualities of purpose. I think people have used purpose for bad. So I think there's a moral question there that you're asking that I think is really important. And I think it's positively useful to society. But that definition of what is positive and is accepted and is beneficial is a philosophical one that'll sort of haunt us for decades and years and generations. But I do think there's a moral question that there has to be a morality attached as a quality of that purpose, in my opinion.
Yeah, really good question, Joe. Thank you.
It's a great question.
Then we have several. Thank you, Zach. Very generous for sharing your tool and your time with us. This has been brilliant. And Deiric, someone even said you.
Oh, some gone peculiar with your line there, Aoife.
Frozen there.
Yeah, you froze there just for a second. Off you go.
Yeah, everybody froze up.
Yeah.
As soon as I try to make a joke, I freeze, of course. And Orla was saying, thank you for the tool. It'll be really interesting to see when we complete that process if it impacts on our team purpose that they recently created. So that's great to hear, Orla. So the only other question I have, and I've been saving this one last, so folks, if you do have more questions, chat them in there. But we've been asked, Zach, how can folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm at zachmercurio.com. You can check out the website. There's plenty of ways to connect there. One of the best ways to connect, and we were talking about this earlier, is that one of my favorite things is my monthly newsletter called The Spark. And what I do in that is I always have a research tidbit, a longer read about purpose and meaningfulness, and then just tools you can use that I ask people to try out and respond to me. Because again, as Deiric mentioned, purpose can be so theoretical, but the practice of purpose is what brings it alive. And so you can get on that email list on my website, and you'll get a monthly email as well. And then on social media, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Zach Mercurio. Would love to connect with you there. And if you get the book, would love to know what you think. There's also a discussion guide on my website. I've been doing book clubs and organizations on this. And let me tell you, it is, it's fantastic and fascinating. Because sometimes I'll go into a book club and answer questions virtually as well. And it's really powerful when people start talking about this together.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks. Great. So I think those are all the questions I have, Deiric. If there's anything else?
I think, we have covered so much in such a short period, and I tell you, there are lots of things jump out at me in terms of impressions, Zach, and we're meeting for the first time, even though we've been communicating for a while. But I think the overriding impression that people will have coming away from this is that you walk the walk, because your contribution, your generosity at every hand's turn, you're saying, I'll send you a link to Purpose Match. Oh, I'll send you that video. Oh, I'll send you this resource. So, and I think it's really great to see somebody who is walking the talk, and doing it. So thank you for that, folks. I would just draw attention, and I didn't want to interrupt Zach's flow, but did you notice in the middle of that several times he spoke about empathy, he spoke about curiosity, and it brings us right back full circle back to this idea of everything touches everything. And we're always talking about purpose, we're always talking about mindfulness, we're always talking about emotional intelligence when we're talking about any of this stuff, because was it Covey, you pick up one end of the stick, you pick up the other. You're always kind of in touch with this. As we start to pull away, Zach, and we'll obviously send a follow-up to everybody who's online and everybody who's looking at the recording with the resources that we've spoken about, and we'll put the contact up again for Zach. But let's say, and this is I apologize in advance for putting you on the spot, Zach, but kind of the sort of journey of 1,000 miles beginning with a single step. If somebody is coming off this call, with the exception of going and buying the book, which I heartily recommend, what would you say is that if they were to set an intent for something they're going to do when they come off this call that is going to move them in the direction of uncovering their purpose, what is that first step in the journey of 1,000 miles?
I think the first step is what we talked about, starting to be purposeful. Okay. One thing I would do today, think about the rest of the day, think about the task that you're dreading the most. And ask yourself, what would happen to a human being if I didn't do it? And how does this ultimately impact a person? Wow. Once you start thinking like that about the things you don't like, all of a sudden you start being able to be purposeful in other areas of your life. So I would start with being purposeful. And the second thing, maybe make that list today of what you loved, what you were good at, and how you improved the world around you, and start cultivating that data about yourself. Because that's what's powerful, and it comes out of practice, not some theoretical, applying to your life. It comes out of your life. Yeah.
Thank you. Great advice. Let me just share the screen again. I just want to pop this up again, if I may. And you can sign up. But let me tell you, if you go onto Zach's site, there are a wealth of really deep articles in there. A lot of the resources that he's spoken about already. Some great discussion going on in there. But you can also pick up his book. And I would honestly heartily recommend it. It is I wrote to him shortly after, when I was halfway through. I was gushing late at night, and you probably remember this, Zach, and I wrote and I said, how did I not know about this book? because it is one of those books that you wonder, how did you not know about it? And Zach threw it back to me, said, I don't know, how did you not know about it? How do we fix this? And I think it needs to be fixed, because this book has a real contribution to make. So folks, I would heartily recommend you go and grab that. You can obviously go to Zach's site and you'll get the selection of all the various different book vendors, or go to your favorite book device. Anything else we should direct? Oh, by the way, Zach, as you can see, makes a great speaker. He would be a great keynote. If you're looking for someone to light the place up, I think Zach is the man. Anything else I should be pointing people at before we thank you and say goodbye, Zach?
No, just thanks for this space and the opportunity and the work that everybody's doing by being part of this group. I mean, this is human bettering work, and it's important.
Great. Well, you know what? We are actually finishing, folks, 5 minutes ahead of time. So you had 1 hour in your diary. So why not take that 5 minutes and make that list that Zach spoke about? And you can still finish absolutely on time, and you've taken it out of the session and into the world. So Zach, really sincerely, wonderful session. A joy to talk to you, and thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a million.
Everybody, take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.